All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. All right, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join our virtual expedition to Antarctica. My name is Delphine. I will be your virtual tour guide along with our very special guest and polar expert from Chimu Adventures, James McAloon. Welcome. Thank you
Well,
for coming.
how are we? I almost said good evening because it's midnight here, but good
Oh,
morning to
yes.
everybody else, or good afternoon, wherever you're listening from.
So I am joining from Costa Rica. So let me talk a little bit about who I am. I am the lead polar specialist at Polartours, our little Arctic and Antarctic cruise platform. I grew up in France where I lived until I was 10 years old, spent the other half of my life in California. And about 4 years ago, I moved to Costa Rica. So quite a different climate from any of the polar regions, if you've been there. I have over 6 years of guiding experience in places like Central America, Iceland, Southeast Asia, and everywhere in between. But kind of recently, I decided I want to stay put for a little while, have a little bit more stability, stop living out of a suitcase. So I began working for Polartours for 2 years now, and we've been developing it, creating this amazing new platform, which I can't wait to talk about in a little bit later on in the presentation. And then on to James, who is, wow, impressive stuff. James grew up in Australia, spent 10 years in the Americas studying, working in the US, in Chile, in Patagonia. And then, of course, throughout that time, he traveled quite a bit through South America, all the way from Ecuador down to, you guessed it, Antarctica.
Yeah.
I was going to say he began his career down under, but actually, no, at the bottom of the world. Down under is Australia. As a logistics and marketing coordinator for the Patagonia Ultra Marathon and Expedition race. Wow, no big deal. And now he finds himself back in Australia 8 years later, super committed to promoting Antarctica and all of the regions he loves. So committed that he's here at midnight his time doing this. That's really great commitment. And he is currently the Global Relationships Manager at Chimu Adventures, which is an Antarctic expedition ship operator. So he's been there for 3 years. We're extremely honored to have him as our guest. He is super passionate about Antarctica. He's traveled there on multiple occasions, and he's going to spend today sharing that knowledge and passion with us. So thank you so much, James. We're really excited to have you.
No, that's great. It's fantastic to be here. I'm blushing a little bit. I don't know if you can tell. I've never had quite an introduction like that. So I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to chatting about all things Antarctica. Funny enough, it's summer here in Australia, and today was the first what we would consider cold day we've had in about 4 months, which for us is about 25 degrees. And I'm actually wearing my Antarctic jacket. So just a coincidence, but it seems to be
Cold
good
in
fit
Costa
for
Rica too.
this.
Yeah, I'm wearing a pretty thick sweatshirt. We have like a little bit of a storm happening, so kind of
Cool.
perfect to cozy up and talk about Antarctica.
Yeah,
So let's
definitely.
give you all a quick breakdown of what I'll be talking about today with James. We're going to go into Ernest Shackleton. He's a pretty big name in Antarctica, and you'll find out why shortly. Then James will take over for us for a little bit, talk about Antarctica's beautiful geography, landscape, animals, and what to expect on board of a ship like the Ocean Endeavor. And then I'll take back over. I'll talk about Polartours, and we will have some time for some amazing questions by our guest. You can also you can expect to see a few polls pop up on your screen, which you can answer at your own will. They're just a little fun interactive polls to get to know who our guests are today, since we can't actually see you. But thank you for joining anyways. So let's get right into it. Ernest Shackleton. So Ernest Shackleton, he is a big name in Antarctica. And we're talking about him today because This year actually marks the 100th anniversary of his passing. And if you ever end up going on a cruise to Antarctica, you will most definitely hear about Ernest Shackleton. But before I get into his personal life, I kind of want to give you a little bit of history, but a very little because this is not my expertise. So we're talking about the mid-19th century, right before uh, right before World War One. So there is a little bit of peace, which is very rare, as you know, in Europe in the 19th century, and this leads to a lot of new technology and a lot of interest in exploring the Earth, the unknown. And so this is what we call the heroic age. And it's called the heroic age partly because people were still exploring with sailboats. So if you can imagine traveling to Antarctica on a sailboat, I mean, that's really heroic stuff right there. But of course, it doesn't last too long because the First World War comes along and introduces new technology like metal ships and tanks. But during the heroic age, we were able to reach both poles. I say we like I was part of it, but definitely not. Um,
People, humans.
Yeah, humans pushed further than ever before across the Earth. So it was a really, really big deal. And so there are so many achievements in the heroic age. But oddly enough, Ernest Shackleton was not one of the people who achieved any of these feats, basically. And so why are we still talking to him? Why are we still talking about him today? He is actually one of the first to explore Antarctica. And his first expedition was in 1907, which is really, really, really early. And he doesn't end up reaching the South Pole, but he sets a new record, and his expedition ends only like a little less than 100 miles off of the South Pole. But he actually discovered the path for the explorers Roald Amundsen and Robert Scott to reach that South Pole in 1910, 3 years later. So he's actually seen as a failure in the newspapers all around Europe because he never reached the South Pole and none of his men ever stepped foot on the continent. He ended up virtually bankrupt, forgotten about as World War I happened anyways. And he pretty much risked everything for this. So why is he still so important? But really, we cannot say that this mission was a failure because realistically, he was totally able to reach the South Pole and he could have done it, but he realized he didn't have enough food for his men to make it home. And so he risked everything, his glory and his fortune, because Amundsen and Scott actually became really, really wealthy because of their fame when they did reach the South Pole. And so when he told his wife, his wife asked him, why didn't you just go there? He responded with something really funny. He said, I thought you would prefer a live donkey than a dead lion. So that's one of his big quotes. And I just thought it was really funny to share. And in 1914, he ended up doing another quote unquote failed expedition to Antarctica. But again, no one in history is considering this a mission. It ended up being, none of us consider this a failure. It ended up being a really, really important rescue mission. So this attempt was to cross the continent from the Weddell Sea, and he ended up getting stuck on an ice floe in the Weddell Sea for 10 months with a crew of 28 men. And his ship was completely crushed. The only thing he had left were 3 little dinghy boats, basically, Zodiacs, as we call them today. Although they did not look like the Zodiacs that you're going to go on if you do choose to do an Antarctica cruise. And so they were stuck, at the bottom of the earth. Nobody knew where they were. And, he had to keep his men alive. He had to keep his men from despair. He had to keep his people focused, their spirits up. So he started training them in new skills and doing everything he could to keep them super busy. And he actually invented what we call the open door policy today. So I'm sure you've heard of it in your workspaces, but basically the open door policy is having your boss or your manager keep an open door where you can honestly come and talk to him or her about what your concerns are, your issues are, etc. Or if you want to just say something positive, you have that open door. So that's a really interesting fact about Sir Ernest Shackleton. So he really had this optimism that was contagious. And for those 10 months, some of the crew even wrote in their diary, one of the happiest days of my life. And this is someone who is stuck on an ice floe in the middle of nowhere without a lot of food. So you can imagine what kind of person this Ernest Shackleton was. His men never lost sight of the goal. They were constantly focused. They sang songs. They celebrated birthdays. They kept doing science experiments. They made sure to eat at the same time every single day to keep this like routine, this focus, which is also something that, you know, we've adopted today as a way to keep focused. I don't do it very well, but I'm sure a lot of us do. And I mean, it's really interesting to know that these were not like sailors with scars and parrots and just really like hardened people. These were really young, inexperienced scientists. I mean, these men were terrified. These men were really scared. This was some serious stuff, of course. So the name of his ship was called the Endurance, which is a beautiful metaphor, I think, for this experience. And he had to be super flexible and make really, really tough decisions. And so if he hadn't had that commitment, that dedication with his crew, I mean, everyone would have fallen apart. Surely there would have been deaths. And this is just the mission that everyone remembers from Ernest Shackleton. And it was seen again as a failure in the newspapers and the headlines, but obviously it was not a failure. And then in 1921, he had his third and final mission, also seen as a failure, but obviously not. One more time, he sailed to Rio with men and who were so loyal to him that some of the same men who were trapped on that ice floe for 10 months returned and signed back up for the 1921 mission. I mean, that is saying something. They sailed to Rio and Shackleton had a heart attack, but he decided to continue on with his expedition. And on the 4th of January, 1922, he arrived to South Georgia, where he had another heart attack, and this one actually took his life. And so he is buried in South Georgia. If you do travel to South Georgia, you may see his gravesite. And his men were really, really loyal to him, like I mentioned before. His right-hand man, Frank Wild, also had his ashes scattered over Shackleton's gravesite at the time of his death. So this man is really, really important in Antarctica. I'm not going into crazy amounts of details. Your expedition guides will really go into his story if you are interested. But something that we can take away from this is that places like the Harvard Business School, they teach about Shackleton. Companies use his policies today. They adopt his practices for leadership. He is a really, really important name in Antarctica, but also in the rest of the world. So I hope that you get to learn all about him if you choose to do an Antarctica cruise, because he is a fascinating person and definitely what we would call a classic hero. Yeah. So,
yeah, perfect. No,
yeah,
it's a good way to sum it up. I think I might jump in a little bit too, because I'm a bit of a Shackleton fanatic or polar heroes fanatic. But I think despite the fact that his expeditions did not go very well, the reason he's remembered today is for his outstanding leadership, like Delphine was just saying, and his ability to keep his men together in the most dire of circumstances. I mean, you got to think in that second voyage, his ship was crushed and sunk, and he was on an ice floe floating around in the middle of nowhere with no hope of being rescued. And for nearly 2 years, he kept all of his men alive, all of his men from getting scurvy, all of his men healthy and sane. in the winter months when there's only 2 hours of daylight and they're spending 18 hours a day in their sleeping bags and they can't see. And then eventually they float all the way to the northern end of the peninsula, and he leaves all his men behind and rows out into the ocean 1,000 kilometers to South Georgia to find rescue, and didn't lose a single person. It's just his survival story, and his ability to lead is more incredible than I think any of the success stories that were out there. And I think that's like Delphine was describing in a bit more detail. That's the reason that everyone knows who Shackleton is. Well, if they've heard of any Antarctic explorers, right? Shackleton's usually the one. So yeah. So even though it wasn't a success to reach the pole or cross the continent, it was a really massive success in so many other ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope. I mean, to be talked about 100 years later with such passion and intrigue, and it really says something about that person. What a guy! What a guy! Shall we move on to Antarctica?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
I think that's why people are here. They want to know what it's like.
Take it away. Take it away, James.
Yes. Let's give it a go. So Antarctica. I don't know if any of the people listening today have been to Antarctica, but I must say it is the most incredible place I've ever been in my life. And when you go there, it'll be a completely different experience to what Shackleton experienced. Fortunately, we've got ice-class ships and state-of-the-art technology, and essentially comfort to allow you to enjoy everything that Antarctica has to offer. So I'm not quite sure what the next slide's got in store for it, but I suppose there you go. When you think of Antarctica, Antarctica is kind of a winter wonderland meets kind of a wildlife bonanza. I think that's the best way of putting it, because there's no place on Earth that I can think of besides probably the Galapagos that has such a huge concentration of wildlife and is so pristine and isolated and outerworldly like Antarctica. I guess a good contrast from the Arctic versus Antarctica is the Arctic is basically ocean surrounded by land, right? So you've got a floating ice cap surrounded by Russia, Europe, North America, and essentially that means that there's nothing really permanent living in the north. On the land masses, you get larger animals, and then in Antarctica, it's the complete opposite. So it's a massive landmass completely surrounded by water. So that offers a couple differences. One, the ice is a little different, the terrain's a lot different, the wildlife is different. Also, an important factor for wildlife, which we'll get into later, historically, there's never been humans inhabiting Antarctica. So it offers a completely different experience from the Arctic. And if you've been to the Arctic, the Antarctica is obviously the next place you want to be, but it's definitely not a comparison. Antarctica is a destination in its own right. I will just point out, though, and we'll tap into this a little bit later, that nearly all of the expedition ships, and when I say expedition, I mean the small ships that take normal people like us down to Antarctica to explore. The majority of them actually leave from the bottom of South America. So if you can see on this map here, you can get to Antarctica from Australia, but obviously it's much further away. And Antarctica is actually much further inland into the Antarctic Circle. And this part of Antarctica is also, the weather's quite hectic. It's really hard to find landings. And so it's very expensive. It's very hard to navigate, and it's very hard to disembark. On the other side, south of South America, you can see that the Antarctic Peninsula juts really far out outside of the Antarctic Circle. And this is also where the Transantarctic Mountains connect to the Andes Mountains that go up towards South America. Now, between South America and the top of the peninsula is only about a day and a half of travel by sea, sometimes 2, depending on the weather. So it's really close. And then also, because it's further out, it's actually in comparison to Antarctic weather, it's actually quite moderate, right? It's not super cold. And that means, and all of the bays and the fjords make it very calm. And so it's calm, it's moderate, and that's where all the wildlife hang out. Because even though they're Antarctic wildlife, they don't, they like to be comfortable. So what you get in the peninsula is it's close to it's close to South America, which means it's easy to access, it's a lot more affordable, and it's I almost said chock-a-block, which is an Australian term, but it's jam-packed with wildlife, and it's very calm. So your experience is quite relaxing, and you can actually enjoy it. You can get off the ship because there's no waves or concern about safety or anything like that. And it's the best place in Antarctica to get off the ship and experience landings and bases and penguin colonies and see whales and seals. It really is an incredible destination. But that is the reason why nearly all of the ships available to go to Antarctica leave from South America. Most of them go out of Ushuaia, which is in Argentina. Some of them go out of Punta Arenas, or there might be a couple other journeys that leave from further up north. But yeah, that's essentially it. If you can see in the top right, Antarctica is huge. It's bigger than the United States. So just to give a little bit of perspective, sometimes the globes and the maps are quite wrong, but they distort the perspective a little bit. But it's larger than Europe. It's I would say the size of Africa. It's just a monstrous continent. And what you're seeing in this photo is it's summer months. In the winter, it doubles in size, and that's just because of the ice freezing. So it's constantly contracting and expanding with the season. But yeah, it's a massive continent and it has a lot to offer.
Amazing.
I don't know what the next slide is. Here we go. So as we were talking about before, South America is the main area, the main access point to Antarctica. And generally there's 3 types of itineraries. So 3 different experiences depending on how much money you have, how much time you have, and what you want to see, essentially. So if you see the blue line here, that is the standard peninsula trip. It's an incredible trip. It's the one I did just before COVID, and it really gives you a fantastic experience down in Antarctica. So you leave from Ushuaia. It's about a day and a half or 2 days across the direct passage, and then you arrive in Antarctica and you slowly, over 4 to 6 days, make your way down the peninsula every single day, in a new location, exploring the different bays and the different bases and areas along the way. Now, there is a 14-day option, which is the yellow line, and this is exactly the same as the peninsula trip, except it's an extra 2 days and extends down the Antarctic Circle. So this is a big thing from people who want to their box, and I think it's trying to reconnect.
James, you're breaking up just a little bit here. I don't know if it's just on my end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what happened. But basically, the Antarctic Circle trips are 14 days, and they're the same experience as a peninsula trip, but an extra 2 days of exploring, so that you're able to get below the Antarctic Circle. Because for a lot of people, they've been to the Arctic Circle and they really want to go to the Antarctic Circle, and so you've been there. You can't really tell that you're there. There's no big red tape or anything like that, but the captain does announce it, and you do a bit of a celebration, and it's just you go a fair bit further south towards Antarctica. And lastly, there is kind of the everything Antarctica. The I'm going once in my life and I want to see absolutely everything. And this is the most expensive option because it is the longest time. It goes for about 21 days. And similarly, you cross the Drake Passage, you explore the Antarctic Peninsula, and then you actually go and sail to South Georgia. Now, if you remember from the start, South Georgia is where Ernest Shackleton is buried. And so actually, to give a bit of perspective, down here where it says Antarctic Peninsula, that's where Ernest Shackleton left, and he rode all the way to South Georgia.
Wow.
So a very, very long way. But yeah, apart from the fact that you can visit his grave, South Georgia is one of the few places in the world where the king penguin is. And so one of maybe 3 places where king penguin colonies are. And because there's so few places in the world for them to go and breed and stuff, you find them in the hundreds of thousands. So as far as the eye can see, it's deafening. It smells disgusting.
I hear you,
but it is
before you see them.
Yeah, you can smell them before you see them. Then they're a concentrated bird basically, but it's beautiful. It's amazing. I can't even describe it. Think of 100,000 animals all packed together, and that's what you're going to get. And then there's seals. It's subantarctic, so you get a very diverse landscape between high glacial mountains and pebble beaches and all that kind of stuff. And it's just an incredible, unique experience. And then on the Falkland Islands is the last stop, or the Malvinas, as some people say if they're from Argentina. And this is overseas British territory. It's a subantarctic island, and it's one of the only islands in the world that have all 5 species of penguin. So when you're on the Antarctic Peninsula, you get, the gentoo and the chinstrap and the Adelie mostly. When you're in South Georgia, you'll get those plus the king penguins. But then in the Falklands, you also get the macaroni penguin, and a lot of other albatross birds and seals, and it's a small English town settlement is there. It's a very kind of unique, remote English settlement. It's quite cool. And then you go back to Ushuaia, so it really offers the full perspective. So those are the main 3. Every sometimes there's an odd voyage. Like this season, the Ocean Endeavour is actually doing a special 14-day voyage that instead of going to the Antarctic Circle, it goes down into the Weddell Sea. So the Weddell Sea is on the east side of the Antarctic Peninsula, and that's where all the massive tabular icebergs are. So around the Antarctic Circle, there's this kind of confluence countercurrent, and all of the glaciers that break off of the continent get caught in it, travel all the way around the continent, and then the peninsula kind of catches it like a net. And so it just gets full of tabular icebergs, and that's the reason that Ernest Shackleton's ship got crushed. So, but ours won't. Ours is very safe and big and fantastic. But it's these things are monstrous and kind of dwarf you in every respect. So they're a cool, different kind of experience that you don't get to see normally. So yeah,
very, very great. I'm happy to announce that I'm going to Antarctica in less than a month, and I'm doing the full 23-day South Georgia Falkland Islands Peninsula, and I am so excited. I'm freaking out. Definitely going to cry at the sight of penguins.
Amazing.
Know,
and you're going to be there during whale season too, and I think I'll cover that a little later, but you're going to be there at the height of whale season, which is fantastic. So I think I'll take you on a little bit of a journey. So Ushuaia is the port. Most of the programs basically have you arrive the day before your voyage. That way everybody's down there and you're checked in and you've had the pre-departure checks and everything is smooth. It is a small kind of quaint town with sitting, at the base of some mountains. There's a walk up to some ski fields if you have some spare time. But it's a beautiful port town that services all the ships that go down to Antarctica. I could go on and on about it, but I've got a big thick book all about the local indigenous from the 1800s. Anyway, so essentially you start in Ushuaia and you cross the Drake Passage. Now, I don't think we have a slide on the Drake Passage, but the Drake Passage tends to have a bit of a reputation for being a bit scary. It is a rough passage. Not going to sugarcoat it, but we do have a saying that it could be the Drake Shake or the Drake Lake. Sometimes it's perfectly smooth and you get down there in a day and a half and you don't even need seasick tablets. And sometimes it's quite rough. We're talking quite big swells. Most of the time it's generally somewhere in between. The ships are very sturdy, very safe. Some have stabilizers. We have state-of-the-art technology. We can go around the storms. We can stop early. It's kind of a rite of passage in a way. I get quite seasick, so I make sure as soon as I get on the ship, I take my seasick medication. And if anybody else gets seasick, I would recommend you do so as well. Once you start feeling a little sick, it's a bit too late. So just if you, it's very safe, it's very fun, but if you do suffer from seasickness like I do, just take your seasick medication. And then after about a day and a half or 2 days, you actually arrive on the peninsula. And as you can see in this photo, it's actually very calm. So like I said, you kind of run into this confluence or this countercurrent, and that's kind of the edge of where all the hectic swell is, and you get into these really protected areas, like so protected sometimes that it feels like the ship is squeezing its way through passages. And so the entire time you're down there, I never needed seasick medication. It's like you're on a lake, and sometimes you wonder how a ship that big got in there, but it allows you to get off the ship using these zodiacs, which are these little tender boats that you can see in the photo. And so essentially in a day by day, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, but you arrive down in Antarctica, and in the morning, the expedition leader does a ding, 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 good morning, everybody. Welcome to blah, blah, blah. The weather today is so-and-so. You'll be assigned to a group, and then after breakfast, your group will be called to disembark. So due to sustainability rules and IATA rules, our governing body that dictates how we can operate safely and sustainably down in Antarctica, we're only allowed to have 100 people on the ice at a time. So because of that, most of the ships limit themselves to 200 people, because then you can split yourselves into two groups, and the first 100 will be taken to the ice to explore the penguin colony or the Antarctic base or wherever you may be. And while they're doing that, the other 100 people will be on these Zodiac boats cruising around the bay, exploring the areas you can't get access to on land, going up to ice floes where the seals are sleeping, exploring and trying to find whales, which you're going to be doing in about 2 weeks, Delphine. And sometime I've got a video on my phone actually of a minke whale coming up and pressing its nose against the Zodiac. They're quite curious creatures. And then about after an hour and a half, you'll swap. And so the people on land will go on the Zodiacs and vice versa. And then after another hour and a half, you'll go back on the ship, warm up, have some lunch, change your clothes if you want to, have a drink. And whilst you're having lunch, the ship's going to move to another place close by, and you'll repeat the process in the afternoon. And then you'll get back on board. There may be a lecture. You might have dinner, go up to some of the clubs and have a drink, go to the sauna, whatever you want to do, essentially. And overnight, the ship goes much further up or down the peninsula to a new location, and you repeat the process. And so over the course of your peninsula voyage, you'll probably do about 10 landings, and I would say up to 30 hours of exploring Antarctica, which is quite incredible. And really, really immersive experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, it is really quite incredible. The day goes by really quickly, and you wonder where all the time's been, because you're just so involved. You're moving constantly. As you can see, sometimes there's historic sites that you can visit. There's Antarctic bases. There's penguin colonies. I mean, there's penguins everywhere you go, but sometimes there's specific colonies, just penguins. And it really is fascinating just to see. I mean, I can't really describe what it feels like when you're down there, because not only is it magnificent, but according to our governing body rules, only one ship can be in an area at the same time. So more than likely, you will not see a single other person that's not on your ship, a single other ship the entire time you're down there. And so then you arrive at these places where there's these old buildings, and it just makes you wonder, oh my God, people lived here. It's quite amazing.
Absolutely bonkers. Oh, I love all that, attention to sustainability and really keeping this place intact because it's just so magical and special. So, way to go.
Yeah, no, perfect. Okay, penguins. So Antarctica has penguins. They're the main reason people go down to Antarctica, I think, besides the landscapes. They're not the only animal down there. Like I said, there's heaps of different seals, there's whales, there's albatross birds, there's other types of species as well. But observing penguins is unavoidable. There's hundreds, if not thousands of them at every landing. And depending on when you go down will actually change your experience and viewing. So the start of the season is really kind of that season when the penguins are arriving. They're courting each other. They're laying eggs. It's really special, and it's quite funny actually because the penguins are quite cheeky. Everybody thinks that penguins go down and try and find this perfect little rock to present to their lady friend, when in fact that's not exactly what happens. What happens is they sit there and they watch all the other penguins, and when the other penguin's not watching, he'll go over and he'll steal a rock from their nest. And it's hilarious. It's like a comedy almost. Some scientists a few years ago did an experiment where they spray painted all the nests a different color, and a month later they came back and all the nests were multicolored because every penguin had just been stealing rocks from every other penguin. So that's beautiful. And then if you go around Christmas time, that's when the eggs are hatching and you get the baby penguins, as you can see there. And it's quite a special experience that very few people ever get to see. It is, the expedition staff have to make sure that you can't approach them and everything's very safe. But it is quite magical. And then at the end of the season, those babies are growing up. They're molting. They're getting rid of their baby feathers in preparation for the migration back north. And that's actually because there's so many babies now grown up. That's when you get the most penguins down in Antarctica at the end of the season. So in terms of penguins, it is penguin heaven. It really is a kind of just a wildlife zoo. So yeah.
Great. Little penguins. All right, let's do whales.
Yeah, and whales. So whales are migratory, and they're quite rare at the start of the season. When I say start of the season, I mean November and December. They start arriving in January, and by February, they're in their abundance. So if you ever watch the whale migrations, they go from the polar regions and they go all the way up to the equator and they come back down. And when they're down here, they're in huge numbers. You'll see them nearly every day. Humpback whales, they're the big show-off ones that like to jump out of the water. The minke ones are a bit smaller. They're the ones that are curious and they'll come up to your Zodiac or your kayak. Blue whales as well, but they're a lot rarer. Sometimes orcas. So if you really want to see whales, I would say go from the end of January through till the end of the season. That's the best time to go. So yeah.
That's my favorite animal. That's the one I'm most excited to see. We have a little poll up if you haven't seen it yet, where you can say which animal is your favorite in Antarctica.
It's really good. And I probably should note too, there's never a bad time to go to Antarctica during the season. Each thing has each part of the season has its benefits. I mean, there's always wildlife there. There's always penguins and seals. But at the start of the season, it's really majestic. They call it the pristine part of the season because the penguins haven't ruined the landings and defecated everywhere. There's a lot more snow still around. And so from a landscape perspective, it's incredible. And then you get the aspects of the penguins courting, etc. And then in the middle of the season, usually that's good for people's holidays and stuff. That's when you get the the penguins start. It's warmer. It's It's fantastic. And then at the end of the season, that's when the wildlife is all there, right? So there's a lot more penguins. The whales are there. The seals are always there as well. The landings are a bit smellier and a bit red. And there's a little bit less snow. When I say there's less snow and ice, everybody freaks out. There's more ice than you can ever imagine. But compared to the start of the season, there is a bit of less ice. So the main feature of the end of the season is the wildlife. So there's never a bad time to go. But if you are particular about landscapes or certain wildlife or anything like that, then there is a better time for it. And here's a slide for it. So as you can see, like I was saying, most of the voyages start in early November, some in late October. That's really the nesting season, and there's lots of wildlife, and the landscapes. And then towards the end, February and March, that's when the whales really arrive. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And I was also told that if you're really interested in photography, that the beginning of the season, because it's so pristine and untouched and defecated, it's a really great time to go.
Yeah, definitely. And they also do camping in Antarctica, but because you can only do that on the snow and ice, it's only offered at the first half of the season. So if you want to have that bucket list of camping on the Antarctic continent, you'll have to go in November and December.
Great. Okay, let's get into the Ocean Endeavor.
Yeah, so this is our baby. There's a lot of ships that go down to Antarctica, but this is our favorite, of course. We've been operating it for about 4 years, I believe, and it's quite a large ship. Originally, it's meant to hold 400 people, but we've limited it to 200 for the reasons I stated earlier of maximizing people's time off the ship. And even though a lot of the ships that are going down now are quite luxury, this is a very comfortable ship, which means it's still very comfortable. It'd be equivalent to a 4-star hotel, but it's great value in terms of pricing. But its main advantage is it has one of the best expedition programs down in Antarctica. And what I mean by that is it maximizes your time off the ship. We have a lot more Zodiacs and staff available to allow freedom of movement, so you can have a personalized experience in Antarctica. It's a larger ship, so it's a lot more stable in rough seas. The main advantage there is if you want to get off the ship, explore as much as possible, this is the ship for you. So yeah, I don't know if it goes into a little bit more detail on the next slide. Yeah. So like all ships, it has all the amenities, right? It's got a restaurant, it's got a pool, it's got a sauna, has a gym. I don't know why you go to the gym while you're in Antarctica, but some people, I tried it once on the Drake Passage and I fell off the bike. So yeah, good luck. Observation deck. Now this seems a little odd, but a 360 observation deck is key, because if you're on one side and someone says, look at the whales, by the time you go down into the ship and up the other side, the whales are gone. The ability to just cross the deck and have a look, it really increases your chance of seeing wildlife and incredible landscapes. So it is a large ship. It has 4 offloading areas, which means we can get everybody off the ship in about 20 minutes, when the average is about 40. So you think about that over 6 days, that ends up being about another 2 to 3 hours of time exploring. We also have a state-of-the-art mudroom, which is like a locker room. It's once again one of those things that's not very glamorous, but in terms of the operations of the ship, it's vital. So everybody on board gets given boots and a jacket. The inner layer of the jacket they actually get to keep. But when they get off and on the ship, they'll have their own locker to keep their boots, their jacket, and their life jacket up down there. Because as you can imagine, walking around penguin colonies and stuff, although you sanitize your boots, it can get a little smelly and damp. And you can only imagine some ships, even though they're luxury, they don't have a mudroom, 200 people trekking through the ship and all that, and then trying to dry it in their room. It kind of loses the luxury. So So having your own locker where you can keep your wet gear, not like your jacket and your boots, it just makes everything so much better. And then we've got a few different clubs on board in terms of an entertainment area, conference area, lounge area. It's a really, really comfortable ship. And even though I'm pointing this out, you're not going to spend much time on the ship. But when you do, it's when we say expedition, it's just a fancy way of saying the ship is small enough to navigate down to Antarctica and let you get off the ship.
Perfect. Sounds like a great combination.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have anything to add about the Ocean Endeavor before I get into Polartours?
Yeah, maybe. I guess one of the things, just going into that kind of maximizing, just to give an idea of what I'm talking about. So our guide to passenger ratio is 8-1. So that means for every 8 passengers, we have one guide. Now, when you're in Antarctica, safety is the number one factor because there's not a clinic or a hospital nearby. There is on the ship. We have a doctor on board and we have a clinic there and stuff like that. But safety is number one priority. When you've got, say, one guide trying to look after 30 people, you kind of have to control where they go and what they do, and they can't really have that freedom to move around. But there's 200 people on board. Some people just want to sit there and watch penguins. Some people want to climb up a really big hill and take a big panoramic photo. Some want to go for a walk over there. Some people just want to go back to the ship because they need to go to the toilet or they're cold. And basically, by having so many expedition guides, allows the passengers essentially to have the flexibility to explore and do what they want while they're on the land. And so even though it is programmed, you can really customize your own trip. If you're adventurous, you can climb up to all the hills and go looking for whales places. And if you just want to sit there and enjoy yourself, you can do that as well. And the reason you can do that is because we have enough guides and expedition stuff to go around. So just little things like that. Smaller is also not always better. I know there's a big hype on small ship cruising, but the ship is a larger ship compared to some other ones that say maybe have 100 passengers. But with that, you don't have the guides, enough room for guides, and you don't have enough room for as many zodiacs. And so even though it's smaller and there's less people, you actually get less time off the ship, and it's more rocky on the direct passage. And so it does have some amazing benefits, but it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be a better experience. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got. The only other thing is, it is very strictly controlled, and sustainability is one of the most important factors. And so, by law, we have to operate sustainably in terms of offsetting all of our carbon footprint. We actually double offset. So we calculate the carbon emissions of every single person and staff on board. And then there's the operations team works with the company to convert that into dollar amount, and then we double that, and that goes towards green projects around the world. Also, there's no single-use plastics on board, sustainably sourced seafood and other foods, leave no trace principles, taking all the rubbish with us. I mean, and this stuff is quite standard across all the ships. So it's not just the Ocean Endeavor operating in Antarctica. We put sustainability and also just responsibility first, because obviously we all love the area and we want to look after it. So yeah, that's kind of the last thing I'll mention.
And that's a great way to end it. Thank you. That was really, really, really great presentation on what it's like to be on board, and the differences between ships. And it just makes me want to go there so badly. Which brings me to how you can go there with Polartours. So let me just talk a little bit about who we are. I won't take up too much of your time because it's already been 15 minutes, and we really appreciate your time. But we are a platform that sells expedition cruises to Antarctica and also the Arctic. And we work with 30 different ships that travel to either Antarctica, the Arctic, or both. the Ocean Endeavor is one of the ships that we work with, and we usually have them split into 3 different categories. We have mid-range, like the Ocean Endeavor, first class, and luxury. So your mid-range ship, again, it has is like your classic expedition ship, where it has everything that you need. It's super comfortable, but it doesn't have a lot of crazy frills and balcony suites and butler service like you may get on a luxury ship. So all these different ships, they offer all of these different cruises, and that gives us on our website over 90 cruises to choose from, which can get really overwhelming for people. And I understand, sometimes what do you call that? Decision fatigue. I get that a lot. And so I can imagine people looking for their cruise to Antarctica feeling really overwhelmed because there's so many to choose from. So that's where we come in at Polartours. We are experts in finding the perfect cruise for you, for your loved ones, for your team, anyone. You give us the details of what you're looking for, and we can filter for the best cruise option for you. And so something that is a really good thing to keep in mind is that we pride ourselves in offering the best price guaranteed. So if you are getting an offer from a competitor, if you send it over to us, we can better the price. That's something that we're really proud of. And it's only because we work with a really, really great ships and really great operators who work with us. And the Ocean Endeavor, for example, is right now having amazing deals for next season, and the space is limited. But you can get like a 20% discount on cabins that are like twin window or higher category, which basically means you can get a really lovely cabin with a large window for the price of like a quadruple shared cabin that's in the interior part of the ship where you don't even have a window. So it just really, really amazing deals like that all over our website. And I want to give you the chance I think you might have seen a pop-up where you can discover our deals. So if you go ahead and click on that, it'll take you to our pages with the Ocean Endeavor deals. But I want to give you the option to, talk about this with me. So if you are really interested in going to Antarctica or the Arctic, please reach out to me at my email address here written here. I would love the chance to have a phone call with you, even a video call, or we can just chat via email, whatever you prefer. And I will be more than happy to help you find this once-in-a-lifetime trip, because it truly is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Some of us are really lucky and get to go more than once, but I don't think that's the case for most people. So if you want to take advantage of the amazing deals we have going on right now for the following season and the current Arctic season as well, please do reach out. I'll be more than happy to get in touch. And yeah, thank you again for joining. We have some time for questions. If anyone is interested, you can type them in either in the chat or in the questions tab, but I think people are mostly going in the chat. I did see one, James. I think one of them is in German, and I do not speak German, and I really apologize.
No, me too. I was about to try and translate on Google because
Robert Neff wrote that there was a recent cruise ship that was on tour and it ran into ice and sank, and everyone was rescued. Do you have any info on how this could happen? Wow.
No, I haven't heard of that at all. So
yeah, me neither.
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that. But I do know of one story years and years ago where a ship got stuck on a rock, and they had to transfer them to another ship. And it's a very rare occurrence. But I suppose sometimes, the areas are really mapped out quite well, but sometimes I guess I really don't know how to answer this, but I suppose rare accidents can happen,
Mm-hmm.
but the operations team and the ship companies have emergency protocols in place and safety measures in place.
Right.
The example I'm thinking of, they were able to quickly follow emergency procedures and contact a ship nearby, and were able to get everybody out within a couple of hours. So even though you don't see ships while you're down there because everybody's in a programmed area, there are other ships nearby in case of something happening, but it is quite rare that that would be the case. Yeah. I mean, there's maybe I don't know that maybe a piece of ice, something happens, I'm not sure, but it is very safe to go down there. The ships are ice strengthened or icebreakers,
Mm-hmm.
so there shouldn't be anything to worry about. So yeah.
Over the last 100 years, we've perfected, maybe not perfected, but have done our part to make sure that
Yeah.
it's safe to go down there. Wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any of them that are not in German, which I
No, I'm
can answer
just
your questions. Someone's typing here. Do. The suspense. The suspense.
yeah.
Oh, the famous question, the current COVID-19 requirements. I can go ahead and answer this.
Mhm.
So the Antarctica season, the next season doesn't start until November, and there is a chance that these requirements will change by the time that the new season begins. But as of now, we can talk about Chile and Argentina. They have two very similar but a little bit different requirements. Chile is the one that is, I would say, the most strict, and I just had to deal with this process myself because I am going to be going on an Antarctica cruise departing from Punta Arenas in Chile. So I need to get a negative PCR test 72 hours before boarding. I have to fill out a traveler's affidavit, which if you've traveled anywhere else, I think most countries have this. It's like this document where you declare that you don't have symptoms, you upload your COVID vaccinations, and you get this QR code. And then people at the airport will scan that. You have to get a health insurance with a minimum coverage of $30,000, and it has to include COVID-19 coverage. So if in the rare chance that you do test positive, you can have your insurance cover your quarantine expenses, etc. You must have a complete vaccination of 2 doses at least, and those have to be validated on the Chilean government website, um, and they must be approved. And this can take up to 30 days. So this is kind of the tricky part that isn't allowing for us to do a lot of last minute reservations in Antarctica this current season, because the government requires a lot of documents months, at least a month before you travel, which makes last minute quite difficult. And upon arriving to Chile, you get tested at the airport, and you can wait out your result either in the airport or at the hotel. So you must quarantine until you get your PCR test results. So Argentina is very similar, except they do not have the government verifying your vaccinations. You don't have to submit that, and then you just need to get tested 72 hours before boarding, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I'm going to Argentina next month, and I have to just fill in a form 48 hours before leaving and have a PCR test within 48 hours of arriving in Argentina, and show those 2 documents plus my vaccination certificate. So that's basically it. So it's a bit easier in Argentina, fortunately.
Yes, it's a
But
little bit
yeah.
And again, these may change next season. We hope so. But it's definitely something that we keep on updating you on our Polartours website. So if you go
that's
to
it.
our travel safety page, you will see the current COVID requirements in each country in Antarctica and the Arctic. We have another question, probably our last one because it's already been an hour. Wow, that went by really fast. Is there Wi-Fi or service on board? I think, James, you should answer that.
Yeah, well, for the Ocean Endeavour, yes, I guess is the answer. You have to pay for it though, and it's not very good. So there are internet packages you can purchase, but you are at the end of the world. So in terms of service, it's probably good enough to send WhatsApp messages, maybe a couple of photos, but definitely not strong enough to, stream Netflix or send videos to people. So it's really good if you just want to communicate via text message with family members or friends and send a couple of photos to let them know you're okay and make them jealous. Those are available for purchase, but it's not kind of a free ship-wide Wi-Fi that anybody can use. So it's routed through the ship's communication systems. So the answer is yes, and just inquire when you do your booking on what the rates are for internet and what the package prices are, and you should be all set.
All right, great. I'm probably not going to do that and really just take a
No,
break.
it's kind of nice just to take a break, really. So it's some people want to keep in touch for safety reasons, or they've got family and stuff at home. When I went, it was just kind of nice. Just took a couple of days, I think, to get it out of my system. But when you kind of get that, it allows you to immerse yourself a lot more because you don't really have a choice of being connected, which is great.
Very beautiful at this time in our world.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. I think that's all we have for today. And I really want to thank everyone for your time. James, thank you so much. It's 1 a.m. where you are, which is quite late. So get some rest. Again, if you have any other questions, you can contact us. I'll put my email address there for you to see. Or if you go straight into our page, there's so many ways you can contact us. So don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to hearing from all of you. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. Thank you so much, James, and everybody else. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world. And we'll hope to be in touch soon. Adios.
Yeah, thank you very much. See you later.
Ciao.